This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Major League Baseball Associate Scout Jeff Stanek. He discusses his process when assessing players and his experience within this field, some of the key characteristics that can be identified in high-performing players, as well as the cross-training potential in some athletes. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Perfect, Jeff. I know we've caught up a little bit off air there, but really appreciate you spending a bit of your Friday morning with me. How are things your end? All safe and well?
Yes, everything's going well here, and I really appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to get into this with you, and been looking forward to it.
Yeah, perfect. So I think this is an exciting podcast for me. I know a little bit around the sport that you're involved with. I follow it a little bit. I wouldn't claim to be an expert, but I think this is a really good example of why I created this podcast, which is really to speak to someone in that world and learn a lot from them. So I'm excited for that. For people that don't know you, haven't come across you before, or first time listener, do you just want to explain kind of who you are, what your role is, and what sport you're in, etc.?
Sure. Again, my name is Jeff Stanek. I've been involved with baseball at the college and a little bit on the amateur scouting side of things. Since I graduated college, I got a college coaching job. I coached at 5 different colleges in the United States at different levels, at the Division I level and junior college level. If your followers are familiar with the junior college, athletic and education system in the U.S. But I coached at 5 different colleges and moved around several different states all around the United States. And I stopped coaching in college several years ago just for family personal reasons. But since then, I've joined on with a major league organization as what's called an associate scout here. Some people call us bird dogs. Bird dog would be the less formal name, but it's probably more accurate. So a bird dog scout, what I do is just help a major league baseball organization to follow some sort of lower level pro prospects that are within my area that I cover. The Major League Baseball draft used to have 40 rounds, and they changed that from time to time. Now, because of COVID, after COVID, they changed some things, and now we only have 20 rounds of the draft. But all 30 teams will make usually 20 selections. Sometimes there are a couple extra picks here and there. But it's a lot of players you have to scout, to be able to draft that many players and into the minor league system. So I sort of help with some lower end guys. As I was explaining to Michael before we started recording, the full-time scouts, which I'm not, but the full-time scouts who I help and I report to cover a really vast area geographically, and they have to watch high school baseball games as well as every level of college baseball that might be in their area. We've got Division I, Division II, junior college, Division III, NAIA baseball. There's a lot of different schools that are playing baseball, and they've got to cover all of that. And basically, from the time teams are starting to play, colleges will start up in February, but they're usually not playing as far north as I am until not playing home games until March. And basically, it's March through June is the time they have to cover baseball in a lot of instances. So I just try to help with that. So I stay involved on that side of things. I also run a website called Figure It Out Baseball. The website is figureitoutbaseball.com, and it's a training website that we've got that I created just for amateur players, coaches, and parents. It's a totally free platform, and it features all of the contributors in the website are college and professional coaches. So what I try to do is just bring a really high level of, you could call it like an educational website for baseball, but I tried to bring that to the amateur baseball community, just trying to do some good for the baseball community. And baseball training can get really expensive. So I wanted to provide a platform that, again, was free, it was accessible to anyone, and hopefully can bring some really high level instruction, as again, all of our videos, the videos are short, like 3 to 6 minute clips of a coach kind of teaching one specific skill or one idea. And again, all of our contributors, coach at the college or professional level. So so that's what I've been up to. And that's sort of my role in the baseball community, past and present. And, hopefully I can add some things to this podcast based on that background.
Perfect. So I think a good starting point for people that aren't necessarily aware of the system is to discuss what the farm system looks like in Major League Baseball. Obviously, if you go through high school, which kind of finishes 18 years of age, you've got a decision of maybe being drafted at that point, or obviously going into the collegiate system and then being drafted further along. But there's obviously quite a substantial collegiate farm system with your AA, AAA, etc. Can you just explain for people what that system looks like, and I guess what the purpose of the system is as well?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head. There's a lot. There's a lot, I guess, going on within the minor league system in baseball. So they also kind of recently changed this. The current baseball system has changed a little bit in the past couple of years. There were quite a few minor league teams that were cut several years ago. The commissioner right now of Major League Baseball, Rob Manfred, has done some things that I think have rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And one of which is to cut back on a lot of minor league teams. So a lot of cities that hosted minor league teams now, they don't have teams there anymore. Now they moved into like college summer leagues. But basically how the farm system works within major league teams, and I think almost every major league team is very close to this right now, but I was kind of searching for the Pirates to give you an accurate reading what the Pirates minor league system looks like. And I'm fairly local to Pittsburgh and to the Pirates, so that's sort of the team that I follow the most. But there is what you might call like a rookie league for players that were signed internationally. There is no international draft, so if a player plays anywhere outside of the U.S. or the Canada, high school and collegiate system, they get signed as international free agents, and they do have leagues for those players who oftentimes are signed at like 16 and 17 years old. But then once players get to the U.S. to play, there are a lot of levels to go through. Baseball is, I think, really unique in this way. There are, and this is sort of like sequential moving up, there are rookie leagues, which is where players that were signed internationally as 16, 17-year-olds, like sort of as they progress, they would be in this league, but also high school players that are drafted, as 18-year-olds, sometimes 17-year-olds, sometimes 19, depending how old guys are when they graduate from high school. But, high school players usually go into what is called a rookie league. And then, players have to progress through from rookie league to, they have low A and high A, double A, triple A, and then the major leagues. And usually players that are drafted out of college now, with this system's only been in place for, I think, a year, but typically the high school players are starting out in rookie league. College players that are drafted will start out in the next level up, which would be low A. And then again, they've got to progress, and be promoted through several different levels before they have a chance to ever get to the major leagues. And there's a lot that goes into that, obviously. And with 20 rounds of the draft, you're getting, 20 drafted players plus all the players that were signed internationally, sort of flooding your minor league system every year. So it's crowded. It's very crowded at the bottom, especially, and there's a lot of pressure to perform, and there are no real guaranteed contracts. So, players can be released almost at any time. So it's very competitive, and there's a lot to the minor league system. But I hope that answers your question. That's sort of how the farm system works within any major league team. So sometimes even people that aren't super familiar with the draft or the minor league system in the United States, they'll hear about a player getting drafted by the Pirates and think that, oh, I'm going to be able to see him in Pittsburgh. He's, most guys are years away. Even the first round picks, the best players in the country coming out of college, it's pretty rare. Once every couple years, you'll see a guy anywhere in Major League Baseball go right from college and immediately appear in major league games. That, maybe once every 5 years, Michael, you see that happen. But, I would say the average player that makes it to the major leagues spends 3 to 5 years in the minor league system before they get to the major leagues. Pay at that level is not very good. It's difficult. It's a difficult road for people to navigate. But yeah, that's kind of a briefing of the minor league, how the minor league system works. They call it the minor league system. Some people again call it the farm system, like you did. But that's kind of basically how it works in the minor leagues.
Yeah, and I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but the main purpose for that is kind of a developmental pathway to give them opportunities to work on aspects of their game that maybe either isn't quite major league ready, or that they're going to make into a particular strength, so that when they get to the major league, if they do, they're going to have real success with that. So is that kind of the purpose of that system, and to help them have steps to develop continuously?
Yeah, for sure. It's developmental. They are trying to coach guys and develop guys, but it's a way for baseball, such a finicky sport as far as the difficulty of projecting who's going to be successful, which is why there are so many rounds of the draft. And in addition to the 20 rounds of the draft that we've got, there are guys that are signing free agent contracts, even in the U.S. A college player that didn't get drafted, or a player playing in what would be called independent baseball, that's professional baseball, that's not affiliated with the major league system. So, but there are always guys kind of fluctuating in and out of all levels. But yes, the minor league system is for development, and it's also just a way for guys to kind of weed themselves out, or other guys to sort of play themselves into being a legitimate prospect who's got a chance to play in the major leagues. At each of those levels, the as you can imagine, the skill level and the difficulty take a step up. And again, baseball is such a strange sport. So in American football, you get drafted out of college and you're immediately playing in the NFL, and you can have an impact as a rookie, right? Your first year out of college. That again, that almost never happens in baseball. It's just such a fine line to what separates a really good 22-year-old from an all-star 26-year-old that's in the major leagues. So yes, each of these levels that these guys have to progress through, when you talk to like minor league coaches or scouts, or like a general manager for an organization, it's like guys have to sort of check some boxes at each level before they can get promoted to the next level. So yeah, each of the levels is meant to work on specific skills, and hone a different skill. Like for a pitcher, for example, he might have to work on the control of his pitches, or might have to work on the effectiveness of his changeup, or whatever that may be. For hitters, it might be recognizing different pitches, or just for someone that's coming right from high school ball to pro ball, it's seeing really high premium velocity every day, which is different than what you see in high school, where velocity can have a big fluctuation. So yeah, that's what the minor league system really is. It's you're teaching guys, but you're also seeing really who is going to progress and who's going to keep getting better. Baseball is also one of those sports where sometimes someone you really don't expect, they just kind of keep getting better every single year. And someone who was a pretty low prospect when they got drafted or coming out of high school ends up being a really, really good major league player. And another guy that's drafted in the first round, there are 30 teams, so you have 30 first round picks every year in the draft. And you, if you're not familiar with Major League Baseball, the odds of making it to the major leagues as a first round pick are not that good. They're not as good as you would think they would be. So it's a very difficult sport to progress through, especially as every level that you move up this pyramid, sort of, you are, you're getting rid of some, you're leaving behind people who aren't quite at your skill level, and seeing just more consistent and better competition every day. And it's fun and exciting to see like who really comes out of that, and who kind of fights their way through and gets to the major leagues. And again, sometimes there used to be 40 rounds of the draft. So you can imagine 40 times 30, how many guys are getting drafted every year. And sometimes there'll be guys that are drafted in, the 30th round or later that make it to the major leagues, and guys that are drafted in the first and second round that don't. I think that it really, one of the cool things about baseball is just that you can never really say that there's a can't miss prospect, and you can never really say that there's someone who who got drafted late and doesn't have a shot, because they could just continue to progress and get better and turn themselves into a prospect.
But in terms of how many prospects you'd have, I guess overall in the system, and maybe include the top end, the major league players in this, how many players would a team, say the Pirates, for example, have within their organization, and then within the affiliate organizations that's part of that system? What number are we looking at?
I don't know what the roster limits are for minor league teams, but I'm guessing it's somewhere from 25 to 30. So, again, looking at the Pirates minor league system, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They've got 6 minor league teams this year, and each of those 6 teams is going to have somewhere in the ballpark of 25 to 30 players, as well as a 25-man roster for the major league team. So there's a lot. There's a it's very difficult to get a chance to play professional baseball, but then you can imagine when you're on that lower level, just say that you're a catcher, for example. Pitchers are a little different because there are a lot of pitchers on each team. But say, for example, you're a catcher, and the major league team has got a catcher who's pretty good and is probably going to be the major league catcher for the next 5 to 10 years. Depending on what organization a guy's in or how good the catcher is. There are only 2 catchers on the major league roster at any particular time. And just say you get drafted and you're on that lowest team. I mean, you've got to outperform, 5 catchers that are all at higher levels than, well, there are 2 to 3 catchers on each team and maybe 5 teams that are higher ranked than you. So for you to make it from that lowest team to the major league team, you have to jump and outperform all of those other guys that are at those those minor league levels ahead of you. And then you've also got the incumbent who is at the major league level, who again might be sometimes you see a good catcher who's on a major league team for, again, anywhere from 3 to 10 years or longer, and you've got to find a way to beat out one of those 2 guys on the major league team as well. So there's a lot of traffic. It's a real traffic jam at the lower levels, especially. And there's more movement down there. And as you continue to progress up the ladder, it gets harder and harder because you have other guys that have sort of been sitting there waiting for their opportunity, or other guys that have established themselves as good major league players who you're trying to beat out for playing time.
We'll come on to maybe the differences between positions and players in a moment, because I think it is quite fascinating to see some of the differences. But in terms of maybe your experience, both from a coaching capacity and then a scouting capacity, those players that maybe are able to make the next step more consistently, and that might not be getting to the majors, because as you said, the chance of that are so small with the number of players in the system. For those players that are able to make the jump from one system to the next, college into next, or whatever that looks like, is there any common threads that you can see between those individuals that you say that is some level of, with some level of certainty, which is difficult to think, but with some level of certainty, they need that characteristic to have some level of progression within their career?
Yeah, I think that there are some, and I was just talking about this recently. So on the Figured Out Baseball website that I have, we have a podcast actually coming out the day that you and I are recording this, Michael. That podcast is with the guy, I think his title is the National Scouting Supervisor for a major league organization. But he and I talked about something similar because I wanted to get his opinion. He's at a much higher level of scouting than I am. But even on the college side of things, the college coaching side of things, and as far as qualities that I think help players to be successful. And I don't know if this is like this in other sports or not. I think that it probably is to a large part. But in my opinion, honestly, confidence and belief in yourself play as big of a role as anything in baseball. And as far as being able to predict or project someone to continue to progress, because baseball is such a game of failure. And any of your listeners that are familiar with baseball know that that's just sort of a term that's thrown around a lot in baseball, is that it's a game of failure. Hitters, just say at the college level, are going to have a batting average. The best college players in the country are going to have a batting average of 400, which just means they're going to average getting 4 hits in 10 at bats. You're still getting out 6 out of 10 times that you come to the plate for an at bat, and guys will go into slumps where for weeks at a time, they're hitting below what their average may be. Maybe they're only getting 2 hits in 10 at bats or whatever it may be. So there's so much failure in baseball. And every time you move up a level, whether you go from high school to college to professional, and then once you're in pro ball, as you sort of move up levels, there are new challenges at every level. The guys that I've seen that have continued to succeed are guys that just never doubt themselves. They never doubt themselves. They never doubt their skills. Put yourself in this situation. So just say in high school, it's not uncommon for guys, again, just kind of dealing with batting average. Batting average is the average of, how many hits you get per at bat, right? So in high school, it's not uncommon for guys to hit over 500. So you're getting a base hit, every other time that you come to the plate. And then they go to college, and their batting average might be, as a freshman in high school or a freshman in college, might go down to like 300. A freshman that hits 300 in high school, or I'm sorry, a freshman in college that hits 300 is a very successful college hitter, especially as a freshman. But imagine that, like, as far as the failure rate goes, you're failing an extra 40% of the time, or 20% of the time, I guess, from high school to college. That takes a big mental toll on guys. A lot of players get to college, and they're doing well, and they're having a pretty good amount of what a college coach would say is a pretty good amount of success. But they feel like they're failing a lot because they're not nearly as successful as they were in high school, right? It's because as a hitter in baseball, you feel like you failed if you don't get a hit, if you don't get on base. So you feel like you're failing a lot more. You kind of, I think a lot of players start to question their ability, or question their skills, or whatever it may be. Guys in the major leagues all the time will have one really bad season, in the midst of a long, really good career. They'll have one season that's well below the others. And I truly believe that even at that level, sometimes guys start to believe their statistics to be reality. Does that make sense how I'm saying that? So they might look at the scoreboard, and the scoreboard tells them what all their statistics are, and you can't get away from that. And just say the first month of your season is not going well, and you look up and see what your batting average is, and what your on base percentage is, or your slugging percentage, or whatever. And then for a pitcher, maybe the pitcher has a couple bad outings, and they look up and see what their earned run average is, which is just, that means, how many runs you average giving up per 9 innings. And they might see some really awful numbers up there. And you have to have a lot of self-confidence to say, I'm better than that. This is just, a short period of time where I'm not performing as well as I'm capable of, but I'm a lot better than that. And to be able to come back from those times when things aren't going your way, and be able to come back and have a good amount of success, I think is difficult to do for players. And I fully believe that separates players once they get to certain levels, because whatever level you're in post high school. So you go to college, and usually you're going to be surrounded by a lot of other players that are very similar talent level, very similar skills. And I think same with pro ball. Once you get into professional baseball, whatever level that you're at, most people around you are very, very similar talent wise. That's why there are so many rounds of the baseball draft. And that's why you can never fully predict who is going to progress. Because you are surrounded by guys that are all of a sudden the same skill level, the same talent level, generally speaking. And I believe that the people who believe in themselves in the good times and the bad times, the people that never waver in their confidence, people that are on the verge of being cocky, not even so much in an outward way, but in an inward way, as far as their self-belief. I really think those are the people that have the best predictor of future success. And that's something that in our sport, scouting goes more and more toward the analytical side of things, and just, measuring everything. And, for pitchers, there are just crazy things that are out there that started in the golf world, and now it's seeped into baseball, where like everything that a pitcher does is measured, right? From their stride length, down the pitcher's mound to, the spin rate of the balls, of the, every pitch that they throw, and everything else that you can imagine is measured. But like, that's not a 100% predictor of success. You know what I mean? Two people can have the exact same metrics, the exact same measurements, but they're not going to have the same amount of success on the mound. And I think a lot of that really comes back to, I mean, there's a lot of things to it with pitchers for sure. But I believe the people that have sustained success and the people that are going to progress and get to the next level and be able to have success beyond where they are and continue to progress are the guys that just, I think believe in themselves and believe that even when other people don't believe in them, or even their statistics say that they're slipping or they're not as good as they were, or they're having a bad year. And other people might start to say, well, like, what's changed? Maybe his skills have diminished. I think it takes a really special player to be able to believe that they can continue to have success. And, the guys that have sustained success in the major leagues, a lot of times their skills do change, but they still find a way to have success even without, as a pitcher, without the premium velocity they had, at 25 when they turn 35, or a hitter that maybe doesn't have the same speed or whatever as he kind of gets older too. So, and that's a long-winded answer to your question, but hopefully that was.
I think from my perspective, what's probably interesting is what you said around the batting averages side. I was Googling as you were talking then, and Barry Bonds, I think, is 298. Bryce Harper's 279, I think it was, which shows you probably two of the high performers, if you like, in Major League Baseball and what their averages actually look like. I guess from a scouting perspective, how do you judge if someone's ready to make that next jump or that next step, and whether they have the skills to be able to do that?
Yeah. So on the, I don't deal a lot on the professional side of things. So I want to make sure that I speak with things that I'm familiar with, but I have spoken with, on my own podcast with Figure Out Baseball. I talked to a lot of minor league coaches there who are coaching these guys that are in the farm systems and getting promoted. And I know that within professional organizations, usually the guys that are getting promoted outside of the guys that sign for the giant bonuses, usually first rounders and second rounders, those guys usually get promoted pretty regularly, almost no matter what their success level has been. But, because they've been paying so much money, and they're usually going to get pushed and see what happens and see if they can perform at the next level. But outside of those guys, Michael, usually in professional baseball, you have to show that you have, for lack of a better term, that you have mastered the level that you're at, and you're not so much getting challenged by that level anymore. When that level is not a challenge for you anymore, then it's time to get promoted. Sometimes other things happen and guys will get hurt, right? That's a lot of times, like, it's funny in baseball that a lot of guys get their opportunity when someone else gets injured, and someone else, someone else gets promoted to take their place, and all of a sudden that guy will sort of take off and never, give that job up again. That happens at every level of baseball, all the way up to Major League Baseball. But yeah, typically within the minor league system, guys have to show that they're not being challenged by their current level anymore, and then it's time for them to be promoted. And, again, a lot of times it happens because there is an opening. Someone at a higher level either gets hurt or they get promoted, or someone gets traded, or whatever it is. And I think the conversation in the organization is, who at the lower level is ready. And I think a lot of times that conversation ends with, well, this person is sort of dominating this level, is sort of mastering, and they need a new challenge. So let's promote them and see what happens, and see how they do at the next level. In high school baseball, as a college scout, which is where more of my background is, and where I was much more hands-on with creating a college roster. Like, I was a recruiting coordinator at 3 different colleges, meaning it was my primary job to recruit high school players into college and decide who, decide on scholarship offers and things of that nature, and just, create the roster from year to year, put the roster together. For me, it was a lot of the same things. I tried to see hitters as an example against higher level pitching and how they fared against them. And statistics really don't mean a whole lot to me at that level. At the high school level, it's because you could face, if you play 4 games in a week, you might face bad pitching 3 of those 4 games. It's the one game against better pitching, higher quality, higher levels of competition that means the most. And if you as a hitter or as a pitcher. When you're facing better competition, the more sort of at ease or comfortable you look, or the more that you feel like you seem like you belong at that level, then I think that's what really is sort of the key factor to deciding how high of a level a high school player can play in college, because there's a lot of different levels of college athletics here as well, in all sports, baseball included. And so just for example, if the scouting that I'll do this spring, I will go watch a hitter in my area that I want to see on a day when I know he's going to face a pitcher who, is one of the better pitchers in our area. And I want to see what kind of at bats that hitter takes against a pitcher who maybe has already committed to going to a certain level of college, or someone that I know will be going to a certain level of college. And, what the quality of the at bats are for the hitter in that situation, or what tell me whether or not that hitter can compete at that level on a day-to-day basis. One of the reasons that baseball is also a very hard sport is because there is so much failure. It is very possible for me to show up on a day, when a hitter is facing a really good pitcher, and the hitter is going to go 0 for 4, meaning no hits in 4 at bats, and look pretty bad in 4 at bats. And he might end up having a really great career, but I just kind of saw him on a bad day. There's just, sometimes pitchers just kind of get the best of hitters. And vice versa. Sometimes a pitcher, the hard thing about evaluating a pitcher is that a pitcher can make a really good pitch, in a good location with good movement, and a hitter can still get a hit. So, you don't, it's not guaranteed success with either pitchers, catchers, defenders. The defense is a little easier to see and to scout, because that's sort of something that shows up every day, kind of the same as speed. You're either fast or you're not. On defense, better defenders will make 95 out of 100 plays, right? They'll make those plays clean. So those are a little easier. But the hitting and pitching, there's so much failure on both sides of that's harder to scout. So I think you evaluate hitters and pitchers a little bit differently. But on the hitting side of things, it really is about how the quality of the hitters at bats against better level pitching. And typically, Michael, you've got to see, I think most college scouts will want to see a hitter minimum 2 to 3 games before they make a decision on him, because you want to see him. You kind of want to see players good and bad. Going back to the confidence thing, and kind of how players react to failure is a big part of scouting players. If a hitter, for example, has a bad day, maybe has the first 3 at bats of the game are pretty bad, you want to see how that player reacts after that at bat. When they go back into the dugout with their team between innings, when they're not on defense, are they throwing equipment around? Are they pouting in the corner? Or, do they kind of take a minute and sort of process that at bat and then go cheer for a teammate? Or if the next hitter behind them hits a double and 2 runs score, like, are they going up and high-fiving their teammates, or are they, selfish and kind of sitting in the dugout sulking and not really, being a part of the team? And those things, I think, are really big indicators too. As far as what's going to lead players to be successful at the next level.
And in terms of if you're looking at batters or pitchers, is there certain things that you think transfer easier? So, for example, if you saw a pitcher who has a lot of movement in his pitch, is able to throw a good cutter, good curveball, good changeup, but maybe doesn't have the velocity that you think actually someone of a minor league player needs that, and he doesn't, does that become a red flag? Or equally with your batters, if they, maybe they have a lot of power at the moment, but don't have quite what you perceive good enough bat speed, is that a red flag for you on that side as well?
Great question. And a hard one to answer, but I'm glad you asked, because I think it's an important part of, if you're talking about evaluating players, those are questions that I think every coach asks. And I think different organizations, college or pro or whatever it is, I think they ask those exact same questions. And the best way that I could answer it is, I think there's sort of a sliding scale. Pitchers eventually have to be able to command their pitches, meaning they have to be able to throw the ball where they want to. It doesn't matter at the highest level, at the major league level, it doesn't matter how good your stuff is, meaning how sharp your curveball or your slider is, how hard you throw. They talk about spin rate in baseball because spin rate on a baseball dictates how much that baseball moves or doesn't move. Um, Eventually it doesn't matter how good all those measurable things are or how tight pitches are or how hard you throw if you don't throw the ball where you want it. Eventually you're going to face hitters that are good enough that, really a sharp pitch that moves a lot but ends up being sort of in the center of the plate is going to get hit a lot. So that's I really don't know that anybody has the exact answer to that on the scouting side of things, but in my opinion, there has to be some level of both. So just say for an example, there was a pitcher who threw exceptionally hard, one of the hardest throwers, that you've seen at the amateur level when you're scouting him and trying to figure out whether or not you should draft him. For that player to be a first round draft pick, there have to be some other things that come along with it. I think, a certain size for pitchers, especially a certain size of player is optimal. I think pitchers that are between 6'2" and 6'4" are probably like what maybe people would call the ideal height, maybe 6'5", something like that. People like big, durable bodies for pitchers. A guy that throws really hard but is only like 5'10", people are going to tend to think that guy's going to have a much higher chance of getting hurt. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But that's kind of the way that I think scouts look at pitchers. Sort of the more big and physical he is, the people think the more durable his body will be during the very long baseball season. For me as a scout, I wanted to see a combination of everything. And to me, there's sort of like a low watermark for velocity. So for example, I think every level of baseball sort of thinks to be successful at my level, there needs to be at least this velocity. Anything below that velocity is probably not going to work. But even that is a little bit, it fluctuates a little bit based on how good the rest of the arsenal is, right? So the more movement a pitcher has, the more command that he has, the more he can really be exact, with a pitch. So just a thing that people say is in baseball is that, this guy he can throw it into a coffee can, meaning like if you have a coffee can that's this big, if a pitcher can throw it in that exact location every time that wherever the catcher sets up and wants to pitch, a pitcher that can throw it exactly where he wants doesn't need to throw as hard as a guy that doesn't know where his pitches are going. A pitcher that has more movement on his pitches doesn't necessarily need to be as exact with his location to have success, especially if he throws hard. So there's all these sort of factors that, like, the more he has on this side, the less he needs over here to have some success. The best pitchers at any level, the best college pitchers at any level, the best pro pitchers at the major league level, or even at any particular level of minor leagues, they're going to have a great combination of all of those things. But to me, I guess a couple of indicators on the pitching side of things, people think there are certain things you can't necessarily teach, and velocity is one of those. Velocity gets a lot of attention from pitchers. On the amateur scouting side of things, again, whether you're scouting for a college or scouting for a pro organization, velocity turns heads. Velocity turns heads more so than good spin rates or sharp sliders, because if you're familiar with baseball, if your fastball tops out at 85, no matter how good your spin is on your curveball, your slider, or whatever, it's not going to be as sharp as if you threw 95, right? If you throw 95 miles an hour, your stuff is automatically better, because even with the same spin rate, by increasing velocity, it just becomes harder to hit. It's harder to time up for hitters. So velocity is certainly something that turns heads. And I think the second thing below that, I think, is kind of equal: command of your pitches and the quality of your stuff. And again, people in baseball, what that means is quality of the stuff. It means how good of movement you have on your pitches. The more movement you can create, obviously, the harder it is to hit. On the hitting side of things, the one skill that I always looked for as a scout, and still do, to me, it doesn't matter if you're scouting for a professional team or a college team. The one skill that stands out to me, I'll say two skills. Number one is one that doesn't seem like it makes maybe as much sense to someone on the outside, but pitch recognition. Being able to recognize pitches and being able to make decisions to swing at the right pitch and to lay off of the wrong pitch. So for example, if I'm a good fastball hitter, I not only want to pick out fastballs to hit and lay off of other pitches when I can, but I also only want to swing at pitches in very specific locations. And the more often I can do that, the better success I'm going to have. If you have a 17 or 18-year-old who swings at everything, anything close, that guy's eventually going to have trouble, because as the pitching gets better and better and you start swinging at balls that are, pitches that are off the plate, left, right, up and down, inside, outside, you're going to have a lot more trouble. So a hitter that can recognize pitches and can is very selective in what they swing at, I think is a huge factor in being able to have success at the next level. And then just a very simple thing of the skill of being able to get the bat to the ball, hand-eye coordination and what I would call barrel control. So the barrel is the fat part of the bat you want to hit the ball with. And I think the ability to hit the bat or hit the ball on the sweet spot of the bat on a very, very consistent basis is a huge indicator of success. So a hitter that swings and misses a lot, for example, was always a red flag to me, and something that, early on in my scouting days, one of my head coaches that I was an assistant under, kind of indicated that to me and said, I don't like guys that swing and miss. So I want you to kind of keep track of that. Well, it's something I always did and still do. The more a hitter swings and misses at whatever level he's currently at, chances are he's going to swing and miss a lot more at the next level up, right? That's not always the case. This is where, again, baseball is a funny sport, because there are some guys that seem to swing and miss the same when they were in college as they do in pro ball, and it's just kind of always the same at every level, or really similar. But other guys, the vast majority of hitters swing and miss more at every level that they move up. So you really want to find guys that don't swing and miss. You want to find guys that very consistently are hitting the ball on the barrel. And like, for example, you kind of mentioned power. Power is something that I think can come over time. For most hitters, as they physically mature, as they get in the weight room, on a consistent basis, they're going to add strength every year that they're playing. They should add more strength, and eventually home runs can come. Now, I do think that the kids, and I'll say kids, kids that are 15, 16 years old that have like professional level power at that level, that may be something that you're not going to be able to teach a guy, or guys may not develop that skill to that level, to that extreme over time, just by being in the weight room and things like that. I think that there are certain types of hitters that just have an innate ability to hit for power, and you may not be able to teach that to guys. But I think the more predictable skill that's going to translate from one level to the other is the ability to get the barrel on the ball consistently. Again, what I would call barrel control, and just being able to very consistently swing at pitches that be selective with what pitches you swing at, and be able to very consistently make contact on the good part of the bat and square what we call square the ball up in baseball. Hit it square, so that you're hitting pretty hard line drives on a consistent basis.
I've got two questions off the back of that. First one, which is, in terms of the recognition side, how much of that is anticipation in terms of having an understanding of what may be coming, so where you are in a count, how that may then affect a pitcher? For example, if you're up 2-1 or down 3-1, what that actually looks like, your ability for them to maybe chuck curveballs or sliders and stuff at you, to where actually they have to hit the strike zone, otherwise they're going to walk you. How much of it is that, and how much of it is an actual tangible skill that people are able to develop, where they can take more at bats and visually recognize, well, this is what an up zone slider looks like, or this is what a fastball on the outside of the zone looks like? How much of it is between those two areas?
Another really good question, and also something that I've asked on the podcast that I have when I bring on players. I was never that good of a player, so it's interesting to me to talk to players that are a lot more skilled than me and kind of ask them those types of things, and how they handle their at bats. So in baseball we would call it guessing. If you're going to be a guess hitter, so every pitch, based on a lot of data or knowledge that you have on a pitcher from facing him in the past, or what you've seen him do in video to other hitters similar to you, you can have in some instances, have a pretty good idea of what a pitcher is going to throw in different situations. And you can sort of, again, what we would term sit on a pitch. So I might sit on a fastball in this count. I might sit on a curveball in this count. I might sit on a changeup in this count. And even there, you might be right 60% of the time, 70% of the time, but there's still a large room for error there. So it's a very dangerous thing to start guessing pitches and to start sitting on certain pitches in different scenarios. But I do think that anticipating is a better way to put it, like you said, and anticipating certain pitches in certain counts. But as far as and that's a good way to be an aggressive hitter in a good way, to be ready for a certain pitch. And when you get it, to be able to be on time and to hit it hard somewhere and do some damage, as opposed to just completely reacting, right? You don't want to be completely reactionary in most situations. You want to try to have an idea what's coming, or at least be ready for a certain pitch, or just have a plan. So in baseball, we call it having an approach. And an approach for most hitters in most situations is that they're going to look for a fastball. And when they get a fastball, they're going to hit it, because fastballs are primarily the easiest pitch to hit, and the pitch that guys would rather hit than a good slider or a good curveball, again, off of most pitchers. So that's kind of a general approach for hitters, that they're going to look for a fastball. And when they get it, they're going to swing at it, and they're going to try, do their best to hit it hard somewhere and not have to get into a count where they have to see something else, or they have to try to hit the pitcher's best pitch, whether it be a curveball, slider, changeup, splitter, whatever it may be. But when I've talked to some hitters at really high levels before and asked them this sort of question, to you and I, we would watch Major League Baseball, and if you've ever stood in, even on a pitching machine, throwing the ball 90 plus miles an hour, like, there's no reaction time. It's gross how little reaction time there is. But the average major league, the average vision of the vision of the average major leaguer is like 2013, 2014, somewhere in that ballpark, 2012. So they have way better vision than you and I do. And then I think most people do. I have 20/20 vision. I don't wear glasses or contacts, and I still can't see, spin on the baseball, and still can't recognize pitches as well as guys that most hitters at that level just have really superior eyesight to the rest of the population. And when I've asked this sort of question to to major leaguers, they'll tell me that they're able to recognize pitches, meaning that they're, out of the pitcher's hand, based on the shape and the movement and whatever else, and how the ball comes out of the pitcher's hand, they're able to recognize what pitch it is. And they might get fooled a little bit in a lot of instances. Sometimes they're certainly going to swing and miss and get fooled, but other times they're able to recognize it enough to at least like foul it off when they have 2 strikes and not strike out, or be able to recognize, a curveball, for example, that's going to break into the strike zone and be a good pitch to hit. They're able to recognize that early enough, even though the ball maybe started out at the strike zone high, or isn't necessarily the pitch that they wanted to hit coming into the at bat. They wanted a fastball, but they get, a curveball that's a good pitch to hit, and they're still able to, pull the trigger, put a good swing on it, and hit it. So there's certainly a mix. I think there needs to be a mix of both. I think hitters need to anticipate what pitch is coming to really have the best outcome to the at bat. If you go too far to that side and you're absolutely guessing and selling out to one particular pitch, you're going to have a real hard time having any success. But on the other hand, if you're totally reactionary, I don't know that you'll have the type of success that you would like to either, because I think that the anticipation of certain pitches and where you'd like to hit the ball, generally speaking, in the field, plays a big part in being able to hit a lot of extra base hits, a lot of doubles and home runs. I think is sort of anticipating one particular pitch in particular situations.
Before I go into the pitching side, just on that, do the clubs collate that information? So would they look at someone's vision and go, oh, this might be an area that maybe they need laser eye surgery, or he's got a particular strength for that? Is that something that they actually test so that, it might increase the chances of them hitting on a player, or not really?
I should know that, but I don't know if major league teams do that. I know on the college side, we don't have the time or the ability to do that before they get on campus. and just, a way that so to me, when I'm scouting, I don't have, any tools to be able to measure that with anybody. But what I will do is primarily, as I said earlier, I'm looking for hitters who swing at certain pitches and certain counts and lay off of other pitches. So like one note that I'll make on a consistent basis is, so a slider, for example, if you're not it seems like, Michael, you've got a good handle on this, but if some of your listeners don't, if a slider is a pitch that's going to be pretty sharp, and nearly as hard as a fastball, and it's going to break, not as much as a curveball, but it's going to break pretty sharp. So basically a slider looks like a fastball for 70 or 80% of the way it's traveling to the plate. And then sort of the last minute, it sort of dives off the plate. I can primarily see if a hitter has good vision by how they react to that pitch. That's why I want to go see a hitter against a good pitcher, because if a pitcher throws a slider that he wants, so a slider that starts like on the outside corner and it looks like a strike for 80% of the time, then it breaks off the plate for a ball, and that hitter is able to lay off of that pitch and not swing at it, especially if you see it happen more than once. Sometimes guys get fooled and you don't know for sure. But if you see that happen more than once, then you get a pretty good idea. This player's seeing that pitch. He's seeing that it's a slider. He's recognizing it. He's laying off of it. And that tells me that he's got good enough vision to at least see the pitching that he's seen that day. Whether he's got good enough vision to see that at the next level when the velocity gets better is hard to tell. On the other hand, if he's swinging at that pitch a lot, he can't see it. There was one player I scouted several years ago that was at the Division III level, who was putting up, like all world type numbers. He was an All-American, I think, first team All-American with the numbers that he was putting up. But I went to see him, and that it was exactly what we're talking about right now. When he saw fastballs, he pounded them. He punished guys for throwing fastballs. He was a big, strong physical kid. But if even pitchers that threw, below average velocity at the pro level, when he was seeing those types of pitchers, he could not lay off of a good curveball, a good slider. He was swinging at him in the dirt, swinging at him when they started on the plate and broke off the plate. He was swinging every time. And I talked to his coach afterward and just said, like, he can't see a slider. I can't possibly turn his name in to get drafted to play professional ball. It's all at that point. That's all he would see. He would see sliders every at bat, and he would he would never get a hit. So to me, that told me that his vision probably wasn't very good, and that's the best way that I'd be able to recognize that. I do believe that major league organizations are probably doing something on that side. I know that they do tests that I'm not aware of from players. They do like personality tests for guys, especially guys that are going to get drafted higher and paid more money. And I'm assuming that they do some sort of vision tests with them at some point as well. Or it might even be something where players are asked to fill out some information before they get drafted by organizations, and that might be part of that. Which again, I wish I was more familiar with that, but I'm not. But at some point, I'm sure that that's a big part of it, because I think most organizations know that without a certain, if your vision is not at a certain level, you're going to have a really hard time as the pitching gets better.
That makes complete sense. And then on the pitching front, I guess velocity is something that can be directly affected by, I'd imagine, age, potentially. The older you get, the more you're going to struggle to keep throwing that. Also, wear and tear on your body, in terms of, there's only so much torque you can put through the elbow before it gives up. Do the individuals that maybe have average velocity, so the power or the speed they're able to put the ball is average, with a lot of other caveats around it of cutters, sliders, curveballs and stuff, stay in the league for longer than those guys that have just got a fastball, and that maybe as they get a bit older and that fastball slows down, they don't have other tools that they're able to utilize to keep them in innings or keep them in the major leagues, etc., or minor leagues?
Yeah. It's really, and I think something that I wish more people paid attention to, because velocity is that's like the thing that every young kid out there is striving for in the baseball world. Training, teenagers, 14 through 18-year-olds, it's like that's all they're focused on the pitching side of things is velocity, and velocity gets you noticed. but no, velocity does not sustain success as much as other things. So guys that you would see in the major leagues that are going to have good long careers, the guys that sustain velocity, I think, can remain at the upper echelon of the pitching world for a long time. Some of the best pitchers in the game today, like Max Scherzer and Jacob deGrom and Garrett Cole, those are guys who have been in the league for a long time that have maintained velocity as they've gone. But other guys are able to have good, long, sustained careers. As you said, as their velocity decreases, I think they just get smarter as far as being able to pitch. Pitching is a bit of a loss. But I think there's a lot of guys that just throw now as opposed to pitch, and there's and that might seem odd to people that are listening to this that aren't really too familiar with baseball, but guys that throw really hard and don't necessarily command their pitches, right? They're just kind of throwing as hard as they can and hope it goes somewhere over the strike zone. It doesn't really matter what part of the strike zone they're in because they're throwing really hard and their pitches have a lot of movement to them, but they're not necessarily locating them exactly where they want. Those guys will be able to have success for a while, but major league hitters are so good that I think that they will adjust over time to pitchers and be able to do enough damage to pitchers where it's just not going to be sustained. The guys that have long careers that pitch, the average, this is a guess, but the average major leaguer is probably 26 years old, 25 years old. I'm 37, and I know that my 37-year-old body doesn't feel like my 27-year-old body. I can't imagine, playing a professional sport every day. But the guys that pitch into their late 30s and beyond are guys that I think they not only develop a good arsenal of pitches, a deeper arsenal. They're able to throw 3, 4, 5 pitches for strikes, and pitches that look different than one another, that move different than one another, that have they have a varying velocities. They might have one, different. Their fastballs are at this level, and their slider and changeup are at this level. Then they have a curveball at that level, so they're able to change velocity on several different levels. I think are able to sustain success, and just really, to me, at that point, it comes down to location for guys. For pitchers to stay in the league for a long time, almost no matter how good their stuff is, they need to eventually locate pitches because hitters are too good. They have too much information. They have too much video on guys. And they say, like, one of the terms in baseball is like the league adjusts. So it's not uncommon in Major League Baseball for a guy to have a lot of success his rookie year, then his second year have a little bit of a setback because the league adjusts. Whether it's a pitcher or a hitter, there's enough information out there that, like, this is how we can have success against this guy, that the league adjusts, and you've got to be able to punch back, whether you're a pitcher or a hitter, to be able to have sustained success. So the guys that have the good long careers, they absolutely have a combination of, usually velocity, at least for a while, but again, that can go away. And there are plenty of guys that don't throw very hard in the major leagues, but the only guys that don't throw hard in the major leagues are the guys that have been in the league for a long time. And the guys that I think really locate their pitches. They're able to throw any pitch they want in any count. For a called strike, for a swinging strike, they're able to what they call add and subtract from pitches. So they might be able to throw the same pitch at several different velocities, kind of depending on what they think can get the hitter out or get the hitter off balance. So I hope that answers your question, but no question that velocity will get you noticed and will in many instances get you to the major leagues. But you could throw the ball 100 miles an hour, and be one of the hardest throwers in the league. But if you don't have or develop the ability to locate your pitches and throw at least one other pitch that is good enough to get major league hitters out, you're not going to last. It's not going to happen for you.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I guess the last question for me on this is, how do you potentially project individuals that might be able to play other positions? So if you look at outfielders, for example, you mentioned earlier around someone maybe finding that level too easy, and they need to be stretched. But obviously the movement pattern of an outfielder, it'd be very different to what you need for a first baseman or a shortstop. So how do you manufacture that in terms of, you've got an individual like you mentioned with the catcher example, which was a really, really good one, or someone who maybe is progressing really, really, really well in a certain position, but you've already got a star in that position or a starter that you know is one of your top players, how do you then go, okay, he might not be able to fit there, but he's got a skill set that we can utilize elsewhere? And are there positions where that's easier to interchange than others?
Oh, absolutely. At amateur levels in high school, for example, usually your best players are going to be in the middle of the field. So your best defensive players are going to be probably at the catching position, shortstop, or center field. Sometimes you can work second base into that. And because I think those positions are the highest skill level defensive positions on the field, usually, and require the most athleticism. Um, generally speaking, when guys change positions, they go from the middle of the field to a corner of the field, which is a much easier progression. Just as an example, not many people in the history of baseball have moved from being a first baseman to being a shortstop, if they're assuming they're a right-handed thrower. Not many guys go from corner, outfield, left and right field positions to center field. That may happen a little more often, but very, very rarely will a guy move from third base to shortstop. Occasionally. So typically, as guys go from high school baseball to college baseball and then into pro baseball, and they move different levels throughout pro baseball, they're usually moving from those higher skill positions to the lower skill positions. And I don't want to say those positions aren't skillful, but just for an example, a shortstop compared to a third baseman. A shortstop usually is going to be a better runner because he's got to cover more ground than a third baseman does. A shortstop is typically going to be rangier, meaning he's going to have more range. He's going to be able to go further up the middle and still get an out, go further toward the third base, the left field line, and still get an out. Whereas a third baseman is still going to have a good first step, meaning they take a first step that's going to put them in a good position to get a good hop to be able to field the ball and make the throw to first. But they probably won't have as much range as the shortstop does. Probably won't be as good of a runner as the shortstop is, generally speaking. But also generally speaking, like a shortstop and a third baseman need more arm strength than a second baseman does. So in high school, just say a guy's playing shortstop because he's the best player on his high school team. He's the best athlete on his high school team. He's the one that's clearly going to go to the highest level of college. The odds of that player staying at shortstop are not great. Typically, and you'd move him based on what the skill set looks like. So just say the guy played shortstop in high school, but he was 6'3", 6'4", and you feel like you might have a better option than him at shortstop, like you said, or there's someone that's already on the team that's a really good shortstop. And not to digress here, but typically the best 9 hitters are going to find their way into the lineup, right? Typically. Sometimes you have 1 or 2 defensive positions that are important enough where even if a guy doesn't hit a lot, he can still play. But generally speaking, if you hit enough, the coaches are going to find a way for you to be in the lineup. So if you are a freshman shortstop on a high school team, or you're the rookie on a major league team, and there's already a guy who's established at shortstop, but you hit enough, you're a good enough hitter to be in the lineup, typically you'll get moved off of that position from a more of a skilled position to a different position. And here's how, generally speaking, I think that would go. If a guy has a really good glove, maybe doesn't have quite the arm strength that you'd like to see at shortstop, then either move to second base or first base makes sense because you're not making as far of throws. You don't have to have as much arm strength to play those positions. If a player is 5'10", he's probably not going to play first base because you want a longer limbed, rangier guy playing first base. So if a guy's 5'10" and he has to move from shortstop, second base is usually a natural progression for him. If a guy on the other hand is 6'3" or 4, first base is probably a natural progression for him. If a guy, generally speaking, if a guy, could still move pretty well, but is a little bit of maybe a bulkier guy or is sort of a power hitter who doesn't, maybe have the flat out foot speed or range that you'd like to see at shortstop or whatever. A lot of times that's a natural progression for him to go to third base. To me, and I think this is accurate, with a lot of levels, but I think the best defensive teams have shortstops all over the field. And what I mean by that is that a really good defensive team probably has a lot of guys that used to play shortstop and have been moved off that position for one reason or another. A third baseman might be somebody who's just really good at compared to the shortstop, is really good at reading the first hop off the bat. I would argue that third base is one of the hardest positions on the field defensively, because you get balls that are hit very hard at you, and you have to have a great first step to be able to make those plays. And a lot of times that is a decision to either make your first step back or your first step forward. And what you're trying to do in baseball is get a long hop, a big hop, as opposed to getting a ball that hits off the. So a short hop is a ball that hits the ground and you're going to catch it usually within 6 inches or a foot of when it hit the ground. Right. A long hop is when the ball is hits the ground and instead of being on its way up, is sort of on its at the top or on its way down. And in between hop is a ball that's still rising but is further. You hit the ball more than like a foot in front of where you're going to catch it. Does that make sense how I'm saying that? A really good third baseman can read those hops and put himself in a position to get the hop that he wants to be able to consistently field the ball. So if a guy's got a great read off the bat and you have two shortstops that are pretty good players and one gets better reads off the bat than the other and one makes better first steps than the other, that one guy might be a really good shortstop, but it seems like he's going to fare pretty well at third because he has those great reactions off the bat. So you put him at third a lot of times. And then usually what makes a guy move from the infield to the outfield, which is another pretty natural progression. You see a lot of outfielders in the major leagues that once were shortstops. They were drafted as shortstops, or they were shortstops even in the minor leagues, but now they're center fielders or left fielders or whatever. A lot of times that's just because their hands aren't good enough and they don't make consistent plays. Shortstops in the major leagues are crazy. Their fielding percentage, the number of plays they make cleanly out of 1,000. That's what most numbers in baseball are out of 1,000 batting averages and fielding percentages. It's a guy might field 985 at shortstop. That means out of 1,000 balls he's making 15 errors, and that's crazy when you think of you got to catch it cleanly and then make the throw. So usually guys are moving off of those positions because they just don't make plays as often at the pro level as they need to. In college, I would just say that guys' hands are a little bit hard. They don't field ground balls as regularly as you'd like to. They don't field them cleanly and able to make plays consistently. But if that guy's still a good enough athlete and is a good enough hitter to be in the lineup, a lot of times that player will end up moving to the outfield for that reason. Again, it's hard. You don't often see guys move from the corner of the field to the middle of the field. It happens occasionally, but not much. You don't see guys in the outfield move from right or left field to center field very often. Usually it's the other direction. And a lot of times if a guy plays long enough, it's because he's not quite as fast, and they'll move from center field to the other positions because you don't need to cover as much ground there. Arm strength plays a lot too in the outfield. What position you play, usually the best arm in the outfield is usually going to be in right field. The worst arm in the outfield is usually going to be in left. And most of that is honestly just because of throws to third base. Throws to home plate are basically the same distance no matter where you're playing, but throws to third base are a lot further from right field than they are from left. And so that's, I think, how guys are often moved from one position to the other, or how you sort of judge what position a guy can play. I've seen shortstops before that I watched them and just thought that guy, I think, can be a really good catcher, for example, or which is a position I haven't really talked about much, but a catcher to me needs to have pretty good feet, needs to have a short arm action, meaning when they throw, they can't have a really long arm circle to throw. They have to have a real short arm circle as far as when they're throwing, and have to have good arm strength, and be able to have pretty strong hands when they're receiving pitches. And it's just most catchers are catchers all the way through their through amateur ball, high school, little league, high school, up to through college baseball. But occasionally you see a guy get moved to catcher if he shows those types of skills. And usually the catcher is like a hard-nosed kind of guy. He's tough. He's got to be back there a lot. He's going to get beat up because he's going to get pitches in the dirt that he's got to block. I think it takes a very certain type of mentality to be a catcher. So I think also, if you were identifying someone playing another position and you said this person, I think, has a chance to be a catcher, that's one of the attributes that you would look for, is someone that's pretty hard-nosed and gritty and likes being dirty and doesn't mind getting beat up, almost like American football type mentality. Like they're just they don't mind a little bit of they don't mind the physicality of the position and maybe sort of enjoy that part of it. Guys will get moved away from the catching position elsewhere for a couple different reasons. The guy's a good enough hitter that you want him in the lineup every day. In the major leagues and even in college, guys don't usually catch every game. generally speaking. It's a big toll on the body. So typically in a college game, in the college world, you might play 3 games on a weekend, what they call a weekend series. Another team comes to your place, you go to another team, and you play 3 days in a row with the same team. Usually catchers will catch 2 out of 3 games, and usually the backup catcher's catching one of those games. In the major leagues, typically you see catchers that are catching 2 to 3 days in a row, then they have a day off. 2 to 3 days in a row, then a day off. But if they're a good enough hitter where they need to be in the lineup every day, then that's when you start experimenting with other positions. I think a lot of catchers end up playing first base. There are a lot of similarities there. Catchers that are really good athletes sometimes will get put into the outfield. As a Pirate fan, there's a guy that played for the Pirates for a long time and then several other teams after the Pirates named Neil Walker. And Neil was drafted as a catcher, but was a good enough offensive player and a good enough athlete where they decided to move him out of the catching position, and he played third base for a while and then eventually settled at second base and was a really good second baseman in the major leagues. But he just showed that, I think, the skill set that second basemen need, just really sure hands and a very accurate throwing arm, things like that. So there's different things at every position for sure, but those are some of the things I think that scouts will tend to see from one position to be able to make a determination that a player has the ability to at least try out another position and kind of see what happens. But there are definitely skills and tools at each position that you look for when trying to evaluate and determine what position a player should ultimately play. But it's funny how often guys play the same position like their whole life. And I was just looking this morning at a Twitter account of a guy that I met this guy recently, and he played in the major leagues just for a couple of years. He wasn't maybe a real long career, maybe played for 3 to 5 years, 6 years, something like that. But he was a catcher in the major leagues, and I saw his son is currently playing minor league baseball, and his son's a catcher. But it's funny how that sort of happens a lot. That from like one generation to the next, people play the same positions, or like just kids end up playing the same position like a lot of their life. Like I said, catchers, you won't find many catchers at any level, college, pro, whatever, that haven't been catching their whole life. You don't have a lot of converted catchers or converted any other positions. A lot of, I'd say outfielder the most often, players converted from elsewhere, but like you don't find a shortstop that hasn't been playing shortstop his whole life very often. And catchers are kind of the same way. There are certain positions on the field that are like that. And how that determination is made when that kid's like 8, 9, 10 years old, I have no idea, but a lot of times it ends up working out.
It's a really interesting trend, and I think that it's one to consider with different sports how that looks. Is there similar trends at that, and maybe dig into the reasons why? I'm conscious that we're at the time we're allotted for this. So, last question for me. Obviously, at the moment you're currently in a athlete evaluation role, if you like. So, who is the best individual you've worked alongside in this space, and why?
The best athlete or the best
So
individual?
the best evaluator in terms of coaches or other scouts.
Or best evaluator.
Yeah, the best evaluator of talent.
Oh boy. I can't say me, right? No, I'm just kidding. No, I think the best evaluator of talent that I have been around. Well, this is a really tough one. And you can tell that Michael didn't prep me with these questions ahead of time. The pro scouts that I work with, I don't get to work as closely with them as I would like, but I think that the one guy that I report to, one of what's called an area scout, I think he's very good. But the college game is a game that I'm a lot more familiar with, and I have a longer track record at that level. But a guy that I used to work for named Justin Schulte, I felt like he's always had a really good. He's been able to read players better than any coach I've ever been around. So you kind of asked earlier about like the different skills that you would see with a player that might project who's going to have real success. When I worked with him, he was the head coach on the team and I was the recruiting coordinator, and I'd bring players that I thought physically could play. And I think there's a lot of good, good talent evaluators out there. And some I've worked with and some I've worked beside, but I think he's the best I've ever seen as far as being able to like read a player, spend a couple hours with a player and be able to determine based on his personality whether or not that player is going to be successful. And I still don't know how. It's not I don't think something you can necessarily teach, but it's something that I think is innate for a lot of people, is just being able to read players and their personalities and whether or not they're going to be able to have success at a different level. So I know that I didn't mean to just avoid your question, but he's one of the best I've seen, just as far as, because that's, anybody can go out to an event with a radar gun and see how hard a pitcher's throwing, or be able to see like this hitter got 3 hits today or whatever. I think there's certain things to being able to be good at that. But I think that, that skill of being able to read players and as far as how they're going to fit in your program and whether or not they're going to be able to have, every player I think in baseball has a ceiling. Probably every sport has a ceiling that you want to see them reach, right? Their maximum physical capabilities will allow them to do. And a coach's job is to coach them up and get them closer to their ceiling as opposed to their floor. And he's been one of the best that I've seen, as far, maybe the best that I've seen as far as being able to read and evaluate players and determine what their career is going to look like at their college. And he's extremely accurate with his readings, and something that I think a lot of coaches wish they were better at.
It's a perfect answer. As I always say on this, I'm interested as to why, and I think that's a really interesting one, as you said, the why there, to help identify what the player's ceiling could potentially be and how it fits with the program. But Jeff, listen, really appreciate your time there. Loads of really interesting stuff and observations that hopefully have informed everyone. Just before we sign off and say bye, do you just want to remind people what is the website that they can find out your work out? Obviously, it sounds like some great initiatives. So if you could just share that again, that'd be great.
I'd love to. Thank you. For anybody that's interested, it's figureitoutbaseball.com, spelled like it sounds, figureitoutbaseball.com. And on the website right now, we've got, at this point, we're shooting this, in early 2022, but we've got more than 900 videos and podcasts on the website. All of our content is created by college and professional coaches. We have videos, we have podcasts. We're kind of working on to expanding in some other things, but it's all totally free. To subscribe, you have to subscribe to watch videos, but subscribing is just, a matter of putting your name and email address in. And once you do that, you have access to everything on the website. We're never going to ask you for any money for anything. So if anyone's listening to this and is interested, in getting some training on the baseball side of things, really good training at a very, very affordable price, obviously, I hope you would check it out. But figureoutbaseball.com is sort of my passion project, something I work a lot on. And Michael, I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to be able to talk about it a little bit.
No worries at all. Really appreciate your time, and catch up again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.